There's a coffin sitting in a museum in Chicago with no way in. No hinge, no seam, no visible opening anywhere on its surface, and yet somehow, 3,000 years ago, someone got a full human body inside it. There's a tomb in Egypt sealed behind a granite door so heavy it took a quarry 400 miles away to supply the stone. And there's a royal burial chamber, found just last year, with gold-painted gods still guarding its entrance, and the one thing missing from the entire tomb is the name of the king buried inside it. 6 tombs. 6 separate mysteries. Every one of them real, every one of them recently confirmed by real science, and every single one of them leaves you with more questions than it answers. Stay with me, because by the end of this you're going to understand exactly how a body gets sealed into a coffin with no opening, and why erasing a king's name was considered a fate worse than death itself. Subscribe before we go in, because we're about to go through all 6. Start with a mystery that took nearly 2,500 years to solve: the actual burial place of Alexander the Great's father. King Philip II built Macedonia into the power that let his son go on to conquer half the known world, and when Philip was assassinated in 336 BC, his exact burial location became one of the great open questions in classical archaeology. In 1977, archaeologists finally uncovered a royal tomb complex at Vergina, in northern Greece, ancient Aegai, containing 4 tombs, and for decades, experts were split between 2 of them, Tomb 1 and Tomb 2, as Philip's actual resting place. Tomb 2 was larger, more impressive, with a marble sarcophagus, everything you'd expect for a king. But there was a problem. Philip was known to have walked with a pronounced limp from a war wound, and skeletal analysis of the remains in Tomb 2 showed no clear corresponding leg injury. Tomb 1, by contrast, was smaller and comparatively plain, which seemed wrong for a king, until researchers pointed out that Philip's burial happened right as Alexander was draining Macedonia's treasury to fund the invasion of Asia. A team of archaeologists eventually ran X-rays, CT scans, and radiocarbon dating on the remains from both tombs, cross-referencing everything against what's historically known about Philip's life and injuries. Their conclusion: Philip II was most likely buried in Tomb 1, alongside the remains of a woman and a child believed to be his wife and son, which would make Tomb 2, the grander one, actually belong to Alexander's half-brother instead. It's a strong case. It's also, researchers are honest to say, still not fully settled. From a tomb researchers spent decades arguing over, to a coffin that seemed to defy basic physics. In the Field Museum in Chicago sits the mummy of a woman known as Lady Shepenmut, from Egypt's 3rd Intermediate period, roughly 3,000 years ago. Her burial was lavish fine linen wrapping, artificial eyes set into her wrapping so she could see in the afterlife, and a beautifully decorated coffin made from cartonnage, a material built from layers of linen and papyrus bonded together, essentially ancient papier mech, reserved specifically for Egypt's elite. And for years, this coffin genuinely puzzled researchers, because there was no way to explain how her body got inside it. No seam, no hinge. The only visible gap was a slit near her feet, far too small to fit a body through. It wasn't until researchers ran CT scans, essentially stacking thousands of X-rays into a full 3-dimensional model, without disturbing the mummy at all, that the technique became clear. The embalmers hadn't built the coffin around her body the ordinary way. They built the cartonnage coffin first, as a complete shell, then softened it with moisture until it was flexible enough to work, cut a single slit down the back, and laced her sealed, wrapped body directly inside it like a corset, before sealing that slit closed and finishing the job with a small wooden panel at her feet. That panel is the only trace left of how she got in at all. If Egypt gives you a mummy with no visible door, ancient China gives you one that looks like she died last week. In 1968, construction workers digging an air raid shelter near Changsha stumbled onto an ancient burial site by accident: 3 tombs, one of which held a noblewoman now known as Lady Dai, or Xin Zui, wife of a high-ranking chancellor during the Western Han Dynasty, more than 2,000 years ago. She was buried inside 4 nested rectangular coffins, wrapped in 20 layers of silk, sealed with charcoal and white clay, inside a tomb elaborately painted with protective deities and mythical creatures. When researchers finally reached her body in 1972, what they found stunned them. Soft skin, joints that could still bend, intact hair, eyelashes, fingerprints, even traces of blood still present in her tissue, a level of preservation almost never seen in a body this old. Embalmers had apparently submerged her in a mysterious, faintly acidic preservative liquid that halted bacterial decay, almost entirely a liquid so potent it reportedly gave researchers who handled her remained skin rashes lasting for months. Her stomach and intestines still contained more than 100 melon seeds, meaning she'd eaten watermelon within hours of the heart attack that ultimately killed her, likely brought on by a combination of diabetes, gallstones, and cardiovascular disease consistent with a life of considerable luxury. She was buried with over 1,400 artifacts, silk clothing, musical instruments, food, and more than 160 carved wooden servant figurines meant to attend her in the afterlife. Now zoom out from individual tombs to something stranger, an entire lost culture, hiding in plain sight under satellite imagery. Archaeologists scanning the Atbai Desert, between the Nile and the Red Sea, kept spotting enormous circular formations from orbit and on the ground. Those turned out to be mass burial enclosures, some up to 260 feet wide, containing the remains of humans and animals arranged deliberately around a central figure, likely a chief or another important community member. Researchers ultimately documented 280 of these enclosure burials, 260 of which had never been recorded before at all, and similar circular burial monuments have since turned up scattered across the deserts of both Egypt and Sudan, suggesting a single, previously unknown nomadic culture once spread across this entire stretch of desert, roughly between 4000 and 2000 BCE, just before dynastic Egypt itself took shape. Unlike the settled farming-based society the Egyptians would go on to build, these people appear to have been herding nomads, yet the way certain burials clearly prioritize one central figure suggests they'd already developed some form of social hierarchy, for reasons researchers still can't precisely date or explain. The leading theory for what happened to them ties directly to climate. This period marks the tail end of the Green Sahara, when the region's monsoon systems were retreating and the desert was drying out around them, likely forcing these communities to migrate south, toward the Nile, as their world quite literally dried up beneath them. Back to Egypt, and a door that turned out to be lying about what it was. In Saqqara, Egypt's dense layered royal necropolis south of Giza, archaeologists uncovered a massive false door carved from solid pink granite, roughly 15 feet tall and 4 feet wide, heavy enough to make transporting the raw stone alone a serious undertaking, since the nearest matching granite quarry sits about 400 miles away. False doors are a common feature in Egyptian tombs, symbolic gateways meant to let a spirit pass between the worlds of the living and the dead, not functional entrances. But this one turned out to be hiding something no false door was supposed to have, a real, physical passage behind it, leading into a genuine hidden tomb packed with statues and relics more than 4,000 years old. The tomb belonged to a previously unknown figure named Prince Userkaf, not the famous king who founded Egypt's 5th dynasty, but his son, a man whose hieroglyphic titles describe him as governor of 2 regions, a royal scribe, a judge, and a priest connected to the necropolis god Saqqara, clearly someone of genuine political weight, and yet a figure completely absent from Egypt's official king lists and royal genealogies, for reasons nobody has been able to explain. Inside, alongside offering tables and painted walls, researchers found something that made the discovery even stranger. Statues of King Djoser, the pharaoh who built Egypt's very first pyramid, and who lived centuries before Userkaf, sitting inside Userkaf's tomb. The leading explanation is that these statues were relocated here roughly 2,000 years after Djoser's death, during Egypt's 26th dynasty, possibly to protect or continue honoring them, meaning this tomb wasn't simply built once and sealed. It was reused, revisited, and repurposed by later generations for centuries after Userkaf himself was buried there. Last stop, and the strangest one of all, a royal tomb with everything except the one thing every Egyptian tomb was supposed to have. In early 2025, a joint American-Egyptian team excavating near a site called Anubis Mountain, close to the sacred city of Abydos, uncovered a royal burial chamber more than 20 feet underground, with mud brick vaults rising over 16 feet high, dating back roughly 3,600 years. Ancient tomb robbers had cleared it out long ago, but the sheer scale of the architecture made clear this had belonged to someone genuinely important. What was missing was the cartouche, the oval hieroglyphic name seal every Egyptian king relied on to be recognized in the afterlife. To ancient Egyptians, a person's name, their ren, was considered a literal, essential part of their identity as long as it survived. So did they. And having it erased or lost was treated as a fate significantly worse than death itself. In this tomb, the cartouche that should have identified the king was damaged beyond reading. What did survive was the painted entrance imagery of the goddesses Isis and Nephthys, protective deities, meant to guard the deceased through the afterlife, confirming this was unmistakably a royal burial. Just one whose owner's name has, so far, been lost entirely. The tomb dates to Egypt's Second Intermediate Period, a genuinely chaotic era when the country fractured into competing regional kingdoms, including a poorly understood line of rulers historians call the Abydos dynasty, a group so obscure that some scholars doubted it had even existed until 2014. When archaeologists confirmed the tomb of one of its kings, Senebkay, whose skeleton showed 18 separate battle wounds, suggesting he died fighting. This newly found tomb shares Senebkay's basic architectural style, but on a noticeably larger scale, which has researchers seriously considering whether this could be an even earlier, more powerful ruler from the same forgotten dynasty. For now, the identity behind Egypt's most recently discovered king remains completely unknown. 6 tombs. A king whose burial site was debated for over 2,000 years. A coffin with no visible way in, solved only by science that didn't exist when it was first discovered. A body preserved well enough that researchers who touched it broke out in rashes. An entire nomadic culture, hiding under satellite imagery in plain desert sand. A prince erased so thoroughly from history that a 15-foot granite door was the only thing left pointing to where he was hidden. And a king, buried within living memory of some of history's most famous pharaohs, whose name, the one thing every Egyptian believed you needed to survive death itself, simply isn't there anymore. Every one of these tombs was found by accident, by satellite, or by a scan nobody expected to reveal anything at all. Which raises the obvious question none of these researchers can answer yet. How many more are still down there, waiting on the exact same kind of accident to finally bring them up into the light? If tombs like these keep you up at night, there's another one waiting on screen right now.